Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as we finally finish this Cicely Mary Barker Sycamore Fairy. Now, if you haven't watched the other videos, or if you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Or if you're not new to the channel and you still haven't watched the other videos, I'm going to link those down below because there were several more before this where we've kind of built up to this final part, which if you've read the title of the video, it's skin and hair. So you can see I already have a nice wash on those areas, and this is just the final touch up. Right now we're putting the colors on the palette, and I will have those on the screen for you. If I add any others in, I'll have that for you as well in case I forget to mention it. I always have a little water on my palette to make it easier to transfer the color from the little wells over to the palette. Now you can see I'm mixing up my yellow ochre and I'm adding in that cadmium free red. That's going to be my skin tone. This is what I used to put those light colors down on there. I used a little more water in the original washes because it's always easier to add more than it is to take it away. I have my reference photo to the left hand side. You can probably see in the upper left hand corner that little black shadow. That's my iPad. So I'm looking at my reference over there and I'm kind of deciding how I want to do the skin, if I have it the color that she has, and I always like to test it. I put my mixing brush to the side. That Royal Langnickel size 8 holds a little more water. It's easier to mix paint with that one, but I have switched over to what I kind of think of as my detail brush. This is the size 3 round from the Winsor Newton Cotman series, and it's a wonderful little brush. It holds just the right amount of water for doing these details. Now, as I said previously, I have already gotten a nice wash on the skin, but it's a very light wash. Same color that I'm using now, a lot more water, and now we're coming back with just a little more color and adding it slowly. I want to be careful. I don't want to add too much. His little face, if you saw the inking process on this, it's very flat when you just put those lines in. So everything we are doing, all of the 3-dimension is going to come from the color and the shading on here. I want to slowly bring that forward. I have the light color down, and then I'm going to slowly add darker and darker colors. Don't want to go too quickly. You can always add more layers. That's the beauty about watercolor. Just kind of take it slowly. So at this point, I'm studying her work, and you'll see me pause occasionally, and that's so that I can look over and see how many layers she has on and what order she's put those layers on. And as I'm working around the mouth, I noticed this when I did the inking, and it was just a little bobble. It's his little chin where it goes up underneath his upper lip, and it kind of bobbles to the left a little bit. It curves a little too much, but my hand jerked, and that's the way it was. And I decided not to add extra ink to correct it. I thought that would just draw more attention to it. So we're going to try to correct that with shadow, and you'll see in a few minutes when we get to that point. There's not a lot that's going to be done with the arms and hands and the feet and legs because we only need just a little bit of shadow on those. Most of the shadow and most of our work is going to be on the face. So the face isn't done. I've added my second layer here, and I'm letting it dry. If I come back and work on it too quickly, I'm going to lift that color that's on there, or I'm going to create a ballooning effect where I have a little too much water on my brush and stuff is dried, and it's just going to ruin the whole thing. So we're going to let that dry completely before we go back up and work on it. And you might think, how can it dry completely? Because I see that there's not a break here on things. I am working, if you haven't watched my videos before, I am working in front of a window, and it is summertime right now, and I keep that window cracked just a little bit while I'm working, and it allows that paint to dry a bit more quickly for me. So I can work on this and then hop right back up and work on that. I don't really like to use a hair dryer. I like to let it dry by itself. So that's what you're going to see here. You're going to see me working down here and then hopping back up to the top. And I'm just taking colors gradually, making a little bit darker, and all of the pauses is me looking at her piece and making certain that I am emulating her paint marks. So bear with me on my pauses. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to hop back on in just a second when I get to a little more detail on that face. So I'm hopping on a bit early before we get to the face because I want to talk about this little foot. I forgot I wanted to talk about the foot. If you'll notice, the only inking line that she had was right there underneath his foot. I'm talking about the bottom of that little foot, right there on kind of the ball of his foot. But his heel, the side, the arch, everything else, she has freehand painted in. And that's the same concept we're going to use when we paint faces. This is what I do when I paint faces. This is what she did. You want a few lines, but you don't want to line everything in. It just kind of closes it up. You want to be able to use color and shadow to create those shapes because it gives you more of a 3D effect. So that's what she's done here, and I thought that was very clever. Now that I'm working on the legs, I'm coming back and adding a few darker colors here. That's why I already had that brown, and then I added it again on the palette, and then that's so I could put the black in there because I want to keep the other brown separate. And I realized that I needed a little bit darker shade in here because his little pants had a shadow on his leg, and we're also going to use this for the bottom of his feet because something else that she did, she made him a little boy who has been walking out in the dirt barefoot. And notice that little ankle right there. Notice how she has not inked that in, but she has used her brush, much like Beatrix Potter, to draw in what she needed. So that was not inked and that was drawn in. So I was trying to make sure I got that in the exact spot it needed to be. While the other foot, because the angle of it, she went ahead and inked that ankle in. So these are just little things when you're studying someone's work you kind of want to pay attention to, because it really has helped me in my own work to realize what I need to do better. So absolutely love her work. But we're coming back and adding those extra dark colors in now that I have that shadow color down there. I don't like to use black for shadows, but this is not black, it's a shade of brown. So we made a shade with that color by adding the black into it. And I'm going to use that for all these clothing areas and anywhere skin goes up underneath clothing or has a shadow created because of like the little branch he's sitting on. So I'm going to keep adding those shadows, and we're almost ready to go back to the face. All right, these little colors that I'm using on his sweet face are the same ones that I used previously, and as we layer them on, we are getting a darker shade on there. And again, that's the beauty of watercolor. Now I'm using the shade that I just made for his skin down below because his eye on this side had a lot of shadow, and just doing that small bit, you can see how by drawing in those areas with the brush and adding those in, did not ink all of that area in, the bridge of his nose coming down. But by adding those shadows in, we are starting to get that 3D effect. It's just like magic. And I'm going to use that dark shadow that I made down below for his legs and arms. I'm going to use that in that area, coming down there underneath his nose, that upper lip. And I'm going to add shadow on his little collar. And we're going to hope that kind of fixes it. I know the mistakes there, and you know the mistakes there, but I'm not going to tell anyone if you won't tell anyone. And maybe no one else will notice that there's a little mistake right there. And I'm thinking about it at this point. How am I going to fix it? Because right now it looks like he has an extreme overbite or his face is deformed to one side. So we're going to have to fix it. I'm going to fix it with that dark brown and just add in some shadows. The little cheeks on his face had kind of a little ruddy look to them, but he's a little redhead and it looks as if he's been playing. So his cheeks are a little redder, and I love that about this. She really picked up the personality of a child, and you can see that in her paint. You can see that in the way she chose to put her colors down on his feet, on his face, the way she's done his hair. It's all tousled around on his head, and she did an excellent job portraying a child. I've heard stories, and if you know the story behind it, you'll have to let me know. This has been so many years ago that I read about Cicely Mary Barker, and I think I shared that my daughter loved the little fairies. She had a whole book with Miss Barker's fairies in it. I believe that I read that she worked with children, and during the breaks when the children were playing, she would sketch them. But don't take my word for that. Go and look that up yourself. And I actually probably should have looked that up before I started doing this voiceover, but I just remembered it. So I wanted to mention that. So perhaps that's why she's so accurate in her artistic description of children, because this really reminds me of a little boy that's been playing outside the way we did when I was a kid. You know, we would play outside and be barefoot and not care if our hair was a mess or if we were dirty. It was just fun. You know, now kids are always on the computer or on their phones, and this just reminds me of how we used to play when I was a kid. Okay, so I put a little too much red on his cheek. The easiest way to fix that, just get a little water on your brush, go back to the paint, blend it around a little bit, and keep tapping that cloth to the side. And I didn't mention all of my supplies in this video because there are several before where I talk about the supplies, but I do have that microfiber cloth over to the side, and this is one of the reasons I keep it there. We are continuing on, and apologize, my head's getting in the lower left-hand part of the screen. We're continuing on with those shadows. And can you see how those dark shadows added in around his eyes really round out the face? It brings that nose forward, it pushes the eyes back, we've rounded out the cheeks, And here's a close-up, and you can see a little bit better around that mouth where I had put some darker color in there earlier, and I'm continuing on with that around the eyes. Same colors, just layering them on. I keep doing this. This is my process for the face. And as soon as we get that the way we want it, I'm going to go to the hair. Because remember, his skin is going under the hair. So I don't want to paint that hair and then try to come paint the skin around it. We're going to go ahead and paint the skin and not mind if it gets up in the hair, because the hair is darker and it's going to cover it up. And yes, here I am coming back, working around that mouth. So remember, I'm not going to tell anyone I messed up if you won't tell anyone I messed up. And by putting a little darker under the nose and putting a little darker right here, that's going to fix that somewhat and hopefully make it not quite as noticeable. And like I said, I didn't want to do that with the ink. I wanted to go ahead and do it with paint because it's not going to be quite as harsh of a correction as it would be if I did it with the ink. So I'm going to be quiet now and I'm going to let you watch me work. Well, I have the cadmium free yellow up there and the alizarin crimson, and those two together are going to give me a nice orange base for his hair. And we don't have any kind of base on there right now. I've not put any layers on there previously because remember we were painting the skin, as I just said, up into the hair, so I didn't want anything up there. So this is like my base layer for that. And notice how it really picks up that reddish orange in the wings. She did a wonderful job at carrying through with this color palette, and many of you have commented on the color palette on this, how you love the colors. She did a great job. I'm just trying to match them. I really hope I did her justice in trying to match these colors and match up her work. So that has dried a little bit on his head. That's why there was a break in the film. I did need that. I didn't have anything else to work on. I needed that to dry for me before I came back. I'm using less water on my brush, and you'll see me tap my brush to the side, and the reason I'm doing that is because I have too much water on it and I'm not picking up the color that I need on there. His hair had a bit of a yellow tint in the highlight, so I don't want to cover everything up with this darker orange. I have to be very careful about that. So I've put on the light color, the base color. I've let that dry. This is my middle color that I'm coming in with. Now, I put the red over the yellow because you know I like to mix the dark into the light, but I needed something just a bit darker, so I took some of that orange that we made and I moved it back over into the red because I need the red to be just a little less red. But putting it on top of the orange that's there, and I'm using, you know, a little bit more water, it's causing it to look more of a reddish orange color. So I didn't want straight red on there. I wanted to add a little bit of that orange that we made back into that color, and that's allowing me to come back and kind of paint in the clumps. And that is something I've told kids. I went through a period in teaching where kids really wanted to learn anime, and hair was the hardest thing for them to do. And I said, think of it as clumps. When you look at hair, you're not looking at each individual strand. you are looking at hair in clumps. So stop trying to use a colored pencil or a marker to draw in every single strand. Think about the shadows. So that's what I'm doing now. I have the highlights done. That was our base layer. Now I'm coming in and I'm painting in clumps that are the shadows. Then we're going to let that dry some, and we're going to look for the darker shadows, and that's going to go on top. These are those darker shadows. So I've gone down into the colors at the bottom of the palette because those are a little bit darker, and I'm picking up that shade that I made for his skin color to make it a little bit darker, and I'm using that over in the hair because when I layer it on top of those colors, it's no longer the light peachy color. It's a nice dark rich color that we need for shading. And I'm going back and using a little bit of the skin tone and putting that on his hair, and again that ties all of his skin and his hair together. And we were talking about earlier that he does have some yellow highlights in his hair, so I went back and got a little bit more of that cadmium free yellow, and I'm adding it on top of some of the other colors that are already there to give them more of that yellow orange look. So I don't want too much of the reddish orange, and I want to leave some spots completely open and not put any of that there so I can get some super high highlights, but that kind of gradually moves it into the highlights. Now we're going to take a look back down at his feet because she actually painted little toenails. So I'm just adding, I'm not adding all the toenails in, I'm just adding the shadows underneath his toe right at the edge, and that's going to give us the indication of toenails. And we have just a few more details to add here and there, a little bit of color on his foot and just a few more touch-ups, and then this little guy will be finished. Thank you so much for joining me on this. And if you went through every one of the videos, kudos to you. I wish I had a prize to send you, but I do send you my appreciation. I'm always happy when you guys are here. If you have any questions or comments, please put those down below. And if you know whether or not she worked in like a daycare situation with children, let me know down below, because for some reason that story has stuck in my mind, like I've read it somewhere. Maybe I dreamed it, I don't know, but let me know in the comments if you know. Again, thank you so much for being here. I will have more fairies in the future, but I have some other stuff coming up, so be looking for that. And until then, my friends, I will see you in the next one.